The fluorescent lights of Riverside Mall cast their usual sterile glow across the polished marble floors as Maya Chen walked through the entrance, her heels clipping softly with each measured step. It had been 3 years since she'd set foot in this place. 3 years since everything had changed. 3 years since she'd become someone she barely recognized when she looked in the mirror. But today wasn't about her transformation. Today was about finding the perfect gift for her mother-in-law's birthday, a woman who had embraced Maya with the kind of unconditional love she'd spent most of her life believing she didn't deserve. Maya adjusted the elegant cream blazer draped over her shoulders and headed toward the luxury boutiques on the 3rd floor. She'd learned to dress well in the past few years, not because her husband demanded it, but because she'd finally learned to see herself as worthy of beautiful things. It was a lesson that had taken 32 years and a complete collapse of everything she thought she knew about herself to learn. The mall was moderately crowded for a Saturday afternoon. Families with strollers navigated around groups of teenagers, while elderly couples moved at their own peaceful pace. Maya found herself smiling at a little girl clutching a balloon, remembering when life had seemed that simple. She was passing by the fountain in the central atrium when she heard it, that laugh. That specific, cruel laugh that could still make her stomach clench even after all this time. Marcus. Maya's steps faltered. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to walk quickly in the opposite direction, to avoid the confrontation that her body knew was coming even before her mind caught up. But she didn't run. She'd spent too many years running from Marcus Thompson and the shadow he'd cast over her life. She'd spent too many years making herself small, apologizing for existing, believing his version of who she was. Those days were over. She kept walking, her pace steady, her head high. Maybe he wouldn't notice her. Maybe he was with someone and would be too distracted. Maybe the universe would grant her this one small mercy. The universe, as it turned out, was not feeling particularly merciful that day. "Maya?" The voice cut through the ambient noise of the mall like a blade. "Maya Rodriguez, is that really you?" She stopped, took a breath, turned around with the kind of graceful composure she'd learned from countless charity galas and business dinners. "Hello, Marcus." He looked almost the same. Same arrogant swagger, same expensive but slightly tacky designer clothes that he wore like armor against his own insecurities. Same meticulously groomed beard that he probably spent more time on each morning than she now spent on her entire routine. But there was something else now. Something harder in his eyes, something bitter around the edges of that familiar smile. Next to him stood a woman Maya didn't recognize. Young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of carefully curated Instagram appearance that spoke of hours spent on makeup tutorials and filter selections. She clung to Marcus's arm with the possessive grip of someone who sensed competition even when none existed. "I can't believe it's you," Marcus said, his eyes traveling up and down Maya's form in a way that made her skin crawl. "You look different." "People change," Maya replied evenly. "Oh, I know people change," Marcus laughed, that same cruel sound that had preceded so many of his worst moments. "But you? I never thought you had it in you. What happened? Did you finally learn how to dress yourself? Did you find a YouTube tutorial or something?" The woman on his arm giggled dutifully, though there was a question in her eyes as she looked between them. Maya felt the old familiar shame trying to rise up in her chest, that automatic response to Marcus's mockery that had been conditioned into her for 5 years of emotional abuse disguised as a relationship. But those days were over. She kept walking, her pace steady, her head high. Maybe he wouldn't notice her. Maybe he was with someone and would be too distracted. Maybe the universe would grant her this one small mercy. The universe, as it turned out, was not feeling particularly merciful that day. "Maya?" The voice cut through the ambient noise of the mall like a blade. "Maya Rodriguez, is that really you?" She stopped, took a breath, turned around with the kind of graceful composure she'd learned from countless charity galas and business dinners. "Hello, Marcus." He looked almost the same. Same arrogant swagger, same expensive but slightly tacky designer clothes that he wore like armor against his own insecurities. Same meticulously groomed beard that he probably spent more time on each morning than she now spent on her entire routine. But there was something else now. Something harder in his eyes, something bitter around the edges of that familiar smile. Next to him stood a woman Maya didn't recognize. Young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of carefully curated Instagram appearance that spoke of hours spent on makeup tutorials and filter selections. She clung to Marcus's arm with the possessive grip of someone who sensed competition even when none existed. "I can't believe it's you," Marcus said, his eyes traveling up and down Maya's form in a way that made her skin crawl. "You look different." "People change," Maya replied evenly. "Oh, I know people change," Marcus laughed, that same cruel sound that had preceded so many of his worst moments. "But you? I never thought you had it in you. What happened? Did you finally learn how to dress yourself? Did you find a YouTube tutorial or something?" The woman on his arm giggled dutifully, though there was a question in her eyes as she looked between them. Maya felt the old familiar shame trying to rise up in her chest, that automatic response to Marcus's mockery that had been conditioned into her for 5 years of emotional abuse disguised as a relationship. But those days were over. She kept walking, her pace steady, her head high. Maybe he wouldn't notice her. Maybe he was with someone and would be too distracted. Maybe the universe would grant her this one small mercy. The universe, as it turned out, was not feeling particularly merciful that day. "Maya?" The voice cut through the ambient noise of the mall like a blade. "Maya Rodriguez? Is that really you?" She stopped, took a breath, turned around with the kind of graceful composure she'd learned from countless charity galas and business dinners. "Hello, Marcus." He looked almost the same. Same arrogant swagger, same expensive but slightly tacky designer clothes that he wore like armor against his own insecurities. Same meticulously groomed beard that he probably spent more time on each morning than she now spent on her entire routine. But there was something else now. Something harder in his eyes, something bitter around the edges of that familiar smile. Next to him stood a woman Maya didn't recognize. Young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of carefully curated Instagram appearance that spoke of hours spent on makeup tutorials and filter selections. She clung to Marcus's arm with a possessive grip of someone who sensed competition even when none existed. "I can't believe it's you," Marcus said, his eyes traveling up and down Maya's form in a way that made her skin crawl. "You look different." "People change," Maya replied evenly. "Oh, I know people change," Marcus laughed, that same cruel sound that had preceded so many of his worst moments. "But you? I never thought you had it in you. What happened? Did you finally learn how to dress yourself? Did you find a YouTube tutorial or something?" The woman on his arm giggled dutifully, though there was a question in her eyes as she looked between them. Maya felt the old familiar shame trying to rise up in her chest, that automatic response to Marcus's mockery that had been conditioned into her for 5 years of emotional abuse disguised as a relationship. But those days were over. She kept walking, her pace steady, her head high. Maybe he wouldn't notice her. Maybe he was with someone and would be too distracted. Maybe the universe would grant her this one small mercy. The universe, as it turned out, was not feeling particularly merciful that day. "Maya?" The voice cut through the ambient noise of the mall like a blade. "Maya Rodriguez? Is that really you?" She stopped, took a breath, turned around with the kind of graceful composure she'd learned from countless charity galas and business dinners. "Hello, Marcus." He looked almost the same. Same arrogant swagger, same expensive but slightly tacky designer clothes that he wore like armor against his own insecurities. Same meticulously groomed beard that he probably spent more time on each morning than she now spent on her entire routine. But there was something else now. Something harder in his eyes, something bitter around the edges of that familiar smile. Next to him stood a woman Maya didn't recognize. Young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of carefully curated Instagram appearance that spoke of hours spent on makeup tutorials and filter selections. She clung to Marcus's arm with the possessive grip of someone who sensed competition even when none existed. I can't believe it's you, Marcus said, his eyes traveling up and down Maya's form in a way that made her skin crawl. You look different. People change, Maya replied evenly. Oh, I know people change, Marcus laughed, that same cruel sound that had preceded so many of his worst moments. But you? I never thought you had it in you. What happened? Did you finally learn how to dress yourself? Did you find a YouTube tutorial or something? The woman on his arm giggled dutifully, though there was a question in her eyes as she looked between them. Maya felt the old familiar shame trying to rise up in her chest, that automatic response to Marcus's mockery that had been conditioned into her for 5 years of emotional abuse disguised as a relationship. But those days were over. She kept walking, her pace steady, her head high. Maybe he wouldn't notice her. Maybe he was with someone and would be too distracted. Maybe the universe would grant her this one small mercy. The universe, as it turned out, was not feeling particularly merciful that day. Maya, the voice cut through the ambient noise of the mall like a blade. Maya Rodriguez, is that really you? Marcus's eyes narrowed. Of course you'd take her side. You always did have a thing for losers and people who can't handle their responsibilities. The mother's face crumpled. She lifted her son and started to hurry away, murmuring more apologies. Maya wanted to stop her, to tell her she'd done nothing wrong, but the woman was already disappearing into the crowd. You haven't changed at all, Maya said, looking at Marcus with something that might have been pity. You're still the same cruel, selfish person you always were. The only difference is I can finally see it clearly. Oh, please, Marcus scoffed. Don't act all high and mighty with me, Maya. We both know you're still the same broke, desperate girl who is grateful I even looked at you. What, did you get a better paying job at that sad little nonprofit you worked at? Buy yourself a nice outfit, and now you think you're somebody? He took a step closer to her, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet tone she remembered too well. Let me tell you something. You can dress it up all you want, but you're still nothing. You'll always be nothing. And deep down, you know it. That's why you could never stand up to me when we were together. That's why you let me walk all over you, because some part of you knew you deserved it. Maya felt the words trying to sink in, trying to find those old wounds and tear them open again. But they couldn't, because she'd healed. Because she'd found people who saw her worth, because she'd learned, painfully and slowly, that Marcus's version of her had never been true. Are you done? She asked calmly. Marcus blinked, clearly expecting more of a reaction. Because I have shopping to do, and I've wasted enough of my life listening to your opinions about who I am. She turned to walk away, and that's when Marcus did something that would change the trajectory of the next hour in ways neither of them could have predicted. He grabbed her arm. Hard. Don't you dare walk away from me, he hissed. I'm not finished talking to you. Maya looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Let go of me. Now. Or what? Marcus's grip tightened. Brittany stood frozen behind him, her eyes wide, clearly unsure what to do. You'll call security? Tell them what? That your ex-boyfriend wanted to finish a conversation? Let go of her. The voice came from behind Marcus, deep and calm, but with an undercurrent of steel that made several passers-by stop and stare. Marcus turned, irritation flashing across his face, ready to dismiss whoever dared interrupt him. But the words died on his lips. The man standing behind him was tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, nothing ostentatious, nothing designer, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never had to prove his worth to anyone. His dark eyes were fixed on Marcus's hand, still gripping Maya's arm, and there was something in his gaze that suggested he was capable of being very dangerous if the situation required it. But it was his face that made Marcus's sneer freeze mid-formation, because this wasn't just some random mall security guard or concerned citizen. This was Elijah Chen. Even someone as self-absorbed as Marcus Thompson knew that name. It was impossible not to. Elijah Chen had built a tech empire from his garage while still in college, turning a simple app idea into a platform now used by millions worldwide. He'd been featured in Forbes, interviewed on financial networks, photographed at events with world leaders and celebrities. His company was worth billions. He was worth billions. And he was looking at Marcus like he was something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "I said," Elijah repeated, his voice still calm but somehow more dangerous in its restraint, "let go of her." Marcus's hand dropped from Maya's arm as if it had been burned. I was just talking," Marcus stammered, his usual bravado evaporating like morning mist. "This is my ex-girlfriend. We were just catching up." "That's your wife," Elijah said, moving to stand beside Maya. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture so natural, so protective, that spoke of years of intimacy and care. "And from where I was standing, it looked like you were grabbing her against her will." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Your wife?" Marcus's face went through several colors in successive rapids. Red, white, an almost greenish shade that might have been funny under different circumstances. "Your wife," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes darted between Maya and Elijah, searching for the joke, for the trick, for any explanation that made sense in the universe he understood. Maya felt Elijah's hand on her back, steady and reassuring. She leaned into him slightly, drawing strength from his presence. "Marcus, this is my husband, Elijah. Elijah, this is Marcus Thompson. We dated a long time ago." "A pleasure, though I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Circumstances where you weren't putting your hands on my wife." I wasn't. Marcus was floundering now, his usual confidence completely shattered. Brittany had taken several steps back, her phone out, probably Googling Elijah Chen to confirm what she was seeing. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding. Maya and we have history. We were just catching up on old times." "By grabbing her arm?" Elijah's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "Is that how you remember old times? By grabbing women who clearly want nothing to do with you?" A small crowd was starting to gather, phones coming out, people whispering. Someone definitely recognized Elijah. This was going to be online within the hour. Marcus seemed to realize this at the same moment. His face went pale. "I should call security," Elijah said, pulling out his phone. "Have them review the camera footage. I'm sure the mall would be interested to know they have someone assaulting people in their public spaces." "No!" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "No, that's not necessary. I'm sorry, okay? Maya, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking. He was sweating now, visibly panicking. "Please, don't call security. I'll leave, right now. I'll leave." Maya looked at him, this man who had once held so much power over her life, who had made her question her worth, her sanity, her right to exist without his permission, and she felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction at seeing him squirm, just a profound sense of closure. "Go," she said calmly. "And Marcus, don't ever put your hands on anyone like that again. Not me, not Brittany, not anyone." Marcus nodded frantically, grabbing Brittany's hand and practically dragging her toward the exit. The young one looked back once, something like understanding in her eyes, before they disappeared into the crowd. The onlookers, sensing the drama was over, began to disperse, though Maya caught more than a few of them still filming, still whispering. She turned to Elijah, who was studying her face with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Maya took a shaky breath, suddenly aware that her hands were trembling. "I think so. I didn't expect to see him, especially not here." Elijah pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around her like a shield against the world. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner. I got caught up at the watch store, and then I couldn't find you." "You were there exactly when I needed you," Maya murmured against his chest, "like always." They stood there for a moment, in the middle of the mall, while life continued around them. Finally, Maya pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "Did you find something for your mom?" Elijah asked, his thumb gently brushing away a tear she'd missed. Maya laughed, a slightly watery sound. "Not yet, I got distracted." "Well then," Elijah said, offering her his arm, "let's finish what you came here to do, and then maybe we get out of here and go somewhere that doesn't have ghosts around every corner." "That sounds perfect," Maya agreed, taking his arm. As they walked toward the boutiques, Maya glanced back once at where Marcus had been standing. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, broken and convinced of her own worthlessness. She thought about the journey she'd taken to get here, to this moment, to this life she'd built. And she thought about how grateful she was that she'd never given up, even when it would have been easier to believe Marcus's version of her story. Because this, right here, right now, this was her real story, and it was just beginning. 3 years earlier, Maya Rodriguez had been a different person entirely. She'd met Marcus Thompson at a friend's barbecue, back when she still got invited to social gatherings, back before Marcus had slowly isolated her from everyone who cared about her. He'd been charming that day, attentive in a way that made her feel special. He'd asked about her work at the nonprofit, had seemed genuinely interested in her passion for helping underserved communities access educational resources. "You're beautiful when you talk about things you care about," he'd said, and Maya had blushed, unused to such direct compliments. She should have seen the red flags. They were there from the beginning, bright and waving, impossible to miss. Except when you're desperate to be loved, when you've spent your whole life feeling like you're not quite enough, you develop a talent for selective blindness. The first time Marcus criticized her was 3 weeks into their relationship. They'd been getting ready for dinner with his colleagues, and Maya had chosen her favorite dress, a simple navy blue A-line that she'd saved up for months to buy. "Are you wearing that?" Marcus had asked, his tone light but with an edge she'd learned to recognize too well. "I thought it looked nice," Maya had replied, suddenly uncertain. "It's fine, I guess. I mean, it's not really the style that my colleagues' girlfriends usually wear, but if you're comfortable." He'd shrugged, already pulling on his jacket. "I just worry they'll think I can't provide for you properly." Maya had changed. Of course she had. And Marcus had smiled, had told her she looked perfect in the expensive dress he'd picked out, even though it wasn't her style at all, even though she felt like she was wearing a costume. That's how it started. Small criticisms wrapped in concern, jokes at her expense disguised as teasing, decisions made for her good that somehow always aligned with what Marcus wanted. By the time Maya realized she was in an abusive relationship, she'd already lost herself so completely that she didn't know how to find her way back. The breakup, when it finally came, was devastating, but not for the reasons anyone might expect. Marcus had left her for someone else, that much was true. But what broke Maya was the relief, the horrible, shameful relief that flooded through her when he said those words. "I'm done. We're done. I can't do this anymore." She'd stood in his apartment, the place she'd been staying for the past 6 months, because he'd convinced her it was financially smart to give up her own lease, and she'd felt like she could breathe fully for years. And then the guilt came. Because shouldn't she be devastated? Shouldn't she be begging him to stay? What kind of person feels relief when the man who loved them, who took care of them, who dealt with all their flaws and failures, decides to leave? Marcus had made sure she knew exactly what kind of person. A broken one. "You're going to regret this," he'd said as she packed her things. "You think anyone else is going to put up with you? Your insecurities, your lack of ambition, your constant need for validation?" He'd laughed, that cruel sound she'd heard in the mall. "Good luck, Maya. You're going to need it." Maya had moved in with her cousin Elena, sleeping on a pull-out couch in a tiny apartment in the part of town Marcus would have called sketchy. She'd cried for weeks. Not for Marcus, she'd realized eventually, but for herself, for the 5 years she'd lost, for the person she'd become, for the way she'd let someone else define her worth. Elena was the one who suggested therapy. "You need help, Prima," she said gently one night, finding Maya staring at her phone, reading through old text messages where Marcus had called her stupid, worthless, a burden. This isn't about him anymore. This is about you figuring out who you are without his voice in your head. The first therapy session was brutal. Dr. Williams, a kind woman in her 50s with warm eyes and no tolerance for self-deception, asked Maya a simple question. Tell me about yourself. And Maya realized she couldn't. Every sentence started with, Marcus always said, or I'm not very good at, or I know I should be better at. That's not you, Dr. Williams said. That's what you've been told you are. There's a difference. It took 6 months of weekly sessions before Maya could start to separate the two. 6 months of homework assignments where she had to list things she liked about herself without qualification. 6 months of learning that her needs were valid, that her boundaries mattered, that she deserved to be treated with respect. And slowly, painfully, Maya started to rebuild. She'd thrown herself into her work at the nonprofit, staying late, taking on extra projects, not to prove Marcus wrong, but to remember what it felt like to be good at something, to make a difference in people's lives. That's where she met Elijah. He'd come to the nonprofit as part of a corporate giving initiative his company was running. Unlike most executives who showed up for a photo op and left, Elijah had stayed. He asked questions. Real questions about their programs, their challenges, their successes.
He'd sat with the kids they served, had listened to their stories, had treated them with the kind of respect that suggested he genuinely saw them as people worth his time. Maya had been impressed, despite herself. She'd learned to be wary of powerful men, men who seemed too good to be true. But Elijah kept showing up. Week after week, he'd volunteer his time. He'd help with tutoring, with organizing supplies, with fixing the ancient computers in their computer lab, and he'd talk to Maya. Not in the way Marcus used to talk at her, monologuing about his achievements and expecting her to be grateful for the attention. Elijah asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. "You're really good at this," he'd said one day, watching her diffuse a conflict between two teenagers with patience and genuine care. "The kids trust you." Maya had felt her automatic response rising up. "Oh, I'm not that good. I just do my best. Anyone could do this." But she'd been working on that in therapy, on accepting compliments without diminishing herself. "Thank you," she'd said instead. "I care about them a lot." Elijah had smiled, and something in Maya's chest had fluttered in a way that both excited and terrified her. Has someone ever seen your worth when you couldn't see it yourself? Hit that like button if you know what it feels like to be truly seen. It changes everything. Their first date had been accidental. Elijah had been at the nonprofit late one Friday evening, helping Maya reorganize their supply closet, when he'd casually mentioned he was hungry. "There's a great Thai place around the corner," Maya had said. "Their pad see ew is incredible." "Want to grab dinner?" Elijah had asked. "My treat, as a thank you for putting up with my terrible organizational skills today." Maya had hesitated. She wasn't ready. She'd told herself she wasn't ready. She'd promised herself at least a year before even thinking about dating again. But something about Elijah felt safe. Maybe it was the way he'd never once stood too close, never invaded her space. Maybe it was how he'd never made her feel less than, never talked down to her, never acted like her thoughts and opinions were anything other than valuable. "Okay," she'd heard herself say, "but we split the bill. You've already done so much for the nonprofit." Elijah had agreed easily, without the wounded pride Marcus would have shown at having his generosity rejected. That dinner had turned into a conversation that lasted 4 hours. They'd talked about everything and nothing. Elijah had told her about growing up as the son of immigrants, about the pressure to succeed, about building his company from nothing, and the isolation that came with success. Maya had found herself sharing her own story, carefully at first, then more openly as she realized Elijah wasn't judging her, wasn't seeing her past with Marcus as a sign of weakness or bad judgment. "He sounds like he was very skilled at manipulation," Elijah had said thoughtfully. "That's not a reflection on you. That's a reflection on him."
It was such a simple statement, but it had made Maya's eyes sting with unexpected tears. Because in all her months of therapy and all her conversations with Elena, no one had put it quite that way. She hadn't been stupid or weak or too desperate for love. She'd been targeted by someone who knew exactly how to exploit vulnerabilities that everyone has. They're dating slowly after that. Elijah never pushed, never rushed her, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He'd been happy to take walks in the park, to grab coffee, to watch movies at his place with his dog curled up between them on the couch. The first time Maya had a panic attack in front of him, triggered by a man at a restaurant who'd raised his voice at a server, Elijah had calmly helped her outside, had sat with her on a bench while she worked through her breathing exercises, and never once made her feel embarrassed or broken. "Want to talk about it?" he'd asked when she'd calmed down. "Marcus used to," Maya had started, then stopped. She was working on not prefacing everything with Marcus. "I have some trauma responses around anger and loud voices. I'm working on it in therapy. Do you want to leave, or do you want to go back in? Either way is fine. Whatever you need." That simple question, "What do you need?" had been more romantic than anything Marcus had ever done for her. They'd gotten married 18 months after that first accidental dinner date. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, in a garden that overlooked the ocean. Maya had worn a dress she had chosen herself, had walked down the aisle alone because she had wanted to come to Elijah as her own person, not as someone being given away. In her vows, she said, "You taught me that love isn't about making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. You taught me that I deserve to take up space in this world. You taught me that my voice matters. For that, and for you, I will be grateful every day of my life." There hadn't been a dry eye in the garden. Now, walking through the mall with Elijah's arm around her waist, Maya reflected on how far she had come, how the woman Marcus had reduced to nothing had built herself back up into someone strong, confident, capable of standing up for herself. They found the perfect gift for Elijah's mother, a beautiful silk scarf in her favorite shade of blue, and were heading toward the exit when they passed by a small cafe. And there, sitting alone at a corner table, was Brittany. The young woman looked up, recognition flashing across her face. For a moment, Maya thought she'd look away, pretend she hadn't seen them. But instead, she stood up, hesitating, then walked over. "I'm sorry about what happened earlier," she blurted out, her words tumbling over each other. "I didn't know. Marcus said you were crazy, that you'd made his life hell during your relationship, and I just believed him without question. But seeing how he grabbed you, how he spoke to you, that's not okay. And I'm starting to realize maybe some of the things he says about me aren't okay either." Maya's heart ached for this young woman, seeing her own past reflected in Brittany's uncertain eyes. "You don't need to apologize," Maya said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, but I will say this. If Marcus is making you feel small, if he's criticizing you, isolating you from friends and family, making you doubt your worth, those are warning signs. You deserve better." Brittany's eyes filled with tears. "He says I'm too sensitive, that I take things the wrong way, that I should be grateful because he takes care of me." "I know," Maya said. "He said the same things to me. And for a long time, I believed him. But here's what I learned. Someone who truly loves you doesn't make you feel grateful for basic respect. Someone who truly loves you doesn't tear you down. Someone who truly loves you builds you up, supports your dreams, makes you feel like you can take on the world." She glanced at Elijah, who'd stepped back slightly to give them privacy, but was watching with compassionate eyes. "That's what love actually looks like." Brittany wiped at her eyes. "I don't know if I can leave. He says no one else would want me, that I'm lucky he puts up with me." "That's what he said to me, too," Maya replied. "And it wasn't true then, and it's not true now. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it the way I almost did, believing someone else's lies about your worth." Elijah reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "This is for a women's resource center," he said quietly, handing it to Brittany. My company partners with them. They provide counseling, legal resources, and safe housing if you need it. You don't have to decide anything right now, but if you ever need help, they're there. Brittany took the card with shaking hands. Thank you. Both of you. I need to think about things. Take your time, Maya said, but promise me you'll think about yourself, about what you need, about what you deserve, not about what Marcus says you deserve, what you actually deserve. Brittany nodded, clutching the card like a lifeline. I will, I promise. As they watched her walk away, Elijah took Maya's hand. That was a good thing you did. I just told her the truth, Maya said. I wish someone had told me those things 3 years ago. Maybe I wouldn't have wasted so much time. You didn't waste time, Elijah said firmly. You survived. You grew. You became the incredible woman I fell in love with. Every experience, even the painful ones, brought you to where you are now. That's not waste. That's life. Maya leaned into him, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. He was right. She'd spent so much time mourning the years with Marcus, seeing them as lost time. But without those years, without that pain, would she have appreciated Elijah? Would she have recognized real love when it showed up? Would she have done the hard work of therapy, of rebuilding herself from the ground up? Maybe not. Can we go home? She asked. I think I've had enough of them all for one day. Absolutely, Elijah agreed. Want to order Thai food and watch terrible reality TV? Maya laughed, the tension of the afternoon finally draining away. That sounds perfect. As they walked toward the parking garage, Maya thought about Marcus, about the man who'd tried to convince her she was nothing. She wondered if he'd learned anything from their encounter today, if seeing her happy and successful had made him question his own narrative. She doubted it. People like Marcus rarely did that kind of self-reflection. But that wasn't her problem anymore. Her problem was deciding between red curry and massaman for dinner. Her problem was remembering to call her mother-in-law to confirm they'd be there for her birthday. Her problem was finishing the grant proposal that was due next week at work. Normal problems, happy problems, the problems of someone who'd reclaimed her life and built something beautiful from the ruins. The evening sun cast long shadows across the parking garage as they reached Elijah's car. He opened her door, not because she couldn't do it herself, but because it was one of the small ways he showed he cared, and Maya slid into the passenger seat. As Elijah walked around to the driver's side, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. Dinner next week? I want to hear all about the new program you're launching at work. Maya smiled, typing back a quick agreement. She had her cousin back in her life, she had friends, she had work she was passionate about, she had a husband who saw her as an equal partner, not a project to be fixed or controlled. She had herself. The drive home was peaceful, filled with easy conversation about nothing important. They stopped at their favorite Thai place, the same restaurant where they'd had their first accidental date, and picked up enough food to last them through the weekend. Back at their house, a beautiful mid-century modern in the hills that Elijah had bought before they met, but that they decorated together, Maya kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. Their dog, a rescue named Buddha, immediately jumped up beside her, demanding attention. I've been thinking, Elijah said, coming into the living room with plates and utensils, about what happened today. Maya tensed slightly. Okay. I'm so proud of you, he said, settling onto the couch beside her. The way you handled that, the way you stood your ground, the way you helped that young woman. You're amazing, Maya Chen. Maya Chen. She still got a little thrill hearing her married name, this identity she'd chosen, this life she'd built. I had a good teacher, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. You've shown me every day what it means to be loved well. We teach each other, Elijah replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. That's how this works. They ate their Thai food and watched reality TV and laughed at the manufactured drama of people whose problems seemed so trivial compared to what they both overcame. Buddha stole bites of chicken from both their plates, despite our protests. Later, as Maya was getting ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked the same as she had that morning, the same as when Marcus had seen her in the mall, but she felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight she hadn't realized she'd still been carrying had finally lifted. Marcus wanted to make her feel small again. He wanted her to remember that he'd left her, that she deemed her unworthy, that she'd been lucky to have him at all. But instead, he'd given her a gift. He'd shown her, beyond any doubt, that she'd made the right choice, that the life she'd built without him wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, broken and convinced she'd never be whole again. If she could send that girl a message, what would she say? Probably something like, "Hold on, it gets better. You get better. And one day you'll run into the man who broke you, and you'll feel nothing but pity for who he is and gratitude for who you've become." If this story resonated with you, if you've ever rebuilt yourself from the ground up, subscribe to this channel. We're building a community of people who understand that our past doesn't define our future, that we're so much more than our worst moments or our hardest seasons. Every week, we share stories of resilience, of transformation, of people who were underestimated and came back stronger. Be part of this journey with us. Maya climbed into bed beside Elijah, who immediately wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" he murmured, already half asleep. "For seeing me, for loving me, for reminding me every day that I'm worth loving." Elijah's arm tightened around her. "Always, Maya, always." And as she drifted off to sleep, Maya Chen felt a profound sense of peace. The ghosts of her past had shown up uninvited today, had tried to drag her back into old patterns, old fears, old versions of herself. But they couldn't, because that version of her was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had people who loved her for exactly who she was, who had built a life that Marcus couldn't touch or diminish. She'd survived, she'd healed, she'd thrived. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it all again. Not to prove anything to Marcus or anyone else, but simply because she deserved a beautiful life. And beautiful lives, she learned, weren't given, they were built. One choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of choosing yourself over someone else's version of who you should be. That was the real story, not the dramatic confrontation at the mall, not the billionaire husband, not the perfect ending. The real story was a woman who'd learned to save herself. Everything else was just epilogue.